What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I am setting up my fantasy cruncher for this single game slate between the Vikings and Eagles tonight. And I start, as always, by making sure these columns are set up the way I want so I can visualize it the way that works for me. I have this preset. I have a quick view that just moves around these columns so I can quickly see how much I'm using a player, what their projection is, what their ownership is. This is kind of the stuff that I like to see in the middle of my screen when I'm making decisions about players. But I do most of my work in the advanced settings. And I'm just using the general tab and the groups tab here. And I'll start in the general tab, unique players per lineup. I'm doing 150 lineups. I don't care if they are one away from each other. So I'm leaving that just one unique player per lineup. Unique players, team salary. I'll move on to. I don't put in a minimum team salary on NFL single game slates. I do put in a maximum just as a way to get a little bit different from the field. If you're playing that full $60,000 salary cap, there's a good chance your lineup is going to be duplicated 100 times. It's a little bit of a smaller slate tonight, but on FanDuel, it happens pretty frequently that you can max enter the contest. Whatever fee you put in, you win the contest. And if you're duplicated many times, you can still lose money. So it's just not a great way to build on FanDuel. One of the biggest things that I'm trying to do in building my lineups is making lineups that are unique, that are not going to be duplicated, preferably at all, but at least probably not more than, I aim for 5 or fewer duplications in my lineups. And one way to do that is to set a salary cap so you're not using your entire salary here. I'd recommend leaving at least $1,000 on the table. For this exercise, I'm going to leave 1,500 on the table. So I'm putting in 58,500, so 1,500 below that 60,000 salary cap that they have for you. I'm instead using 58,500. All right, offensive players versus defense. Pretty fun that this is a factor now on FanDuel. We do have team defenses. I'm always setting this to the maximum number of players. So theoretically, I could have an Eagles onslaught tonight, 4 players from the Eagles and the Vikings defense in there. It's not the likeliest outcome, but it's also not a lineup that a lot of player are going to be using. And if the Vikings offense sputters and the Vikings defense gets a pick 6, maybe the Vikings defense is the highest scoring play on the Vikings, and they make it in there with 4 Eagles. So I'm allowing max 4 players there. Global exposure setting, I typically leave at 100%. I go in and I change that number for the MVP spot, but I for every other spot, I just leave it at 100%. Randomness, I typically use 50%. It all kind of depends how much control you want over your lineups. If you want more control, you're going to want to set that number lower. Minimum projection included in calculation, currently set at 3. I usually Honestly, I usually keep it at 3 because I go in and change projections elsewhere, and give players boost to make sure, like any player that I want to be in my player pool, I just give their projection a little boost to make sure that they are 3 or more. But I would recommend typically, if you're new to doing this, that you're not messing around with those projections individually. You are just maybe using the thumbs up and thumbs down to get more or less of players. So you might want to change this down to 2 and get some of those more off the wall plays. All right, I think that is good enough for my general settings. I think that's about everything that I typically change in here. And then the rest of the work that I do is in the groups tab. Guys, if you're a new Stokastic Plus Platinum or NFL user and want to give our NFL DFS tools a test run before purchasing, we have a great offer for you. Get access to all of our NFL DFS tools 100% free for 3 days. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer on stokastic.com, including new tools such as our lineup generator and player compare, as well as player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, our boom bust tool, and so much more. Click the link in the description of this video below to join to activate your 3-day free trial now. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this trial offer. I am, of course, showing you how to set up Fantasy Cruncher, so just keep that in mind that it's an add-on, but you can add it to this free trial. All right, create new group. So this first group I'm going to create is Jalen Hurts in the MVP spot as my key player. So for this group, it's just lineups that have Jalen Hurts in the MVP spot. and I have to decide, do I want to require Eagles pass catches if I have Jalen Hurts at MVP? Or do I want to give them boost? What do I want to do? So I'm going to go in right away and I'm going to add all of the Eagles pass catchers to this group. And I'm just adding anybody with a projection. And notice that for Hurts, I add him as a key player. You can see here, these are the key player, this key player icon. For everybody else, I'm just adding them to the more general group, and that's this icon on the left here. Now, do you want to include running backs in this group? Are you going to give any kind of boost to running backs if you have Hurts in the MVP spot? Maybe a little bit. I'll add them and think about what whether I want to do that. Excuse me. All right. So I think for me, I'm only going to apply plus minus adjustments, which means I'm not requiring that any of these players be in the lineup with Jalen Hurts at MVP. That's because Jalen Hurts rushed for just under 800 yards last year on the ground with 10 rushing touchdowns. He just does so much on the ground that you don't necessarily need him to be throwing the ball a lot and bringing along one of these pass catchers to still be the optimal captain. If he rushes for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, there's a good chance Jalen Hurts is the MVP, and he hasn't brought any pass catcher along with him for the ride. So I'm going to click this button and only apply plus minus adjustments. I'm not requiring any of these players, but I still think more likely than not, if Jalen Hurts is MVP, he's bringing at least one pass catcher along with him. So I am going to give these players a little bit of a boost. And I'm typically giving bigger boosts to receivers who don't have huge projections and don't cost a lot. And then do I want to, there's no point in having these running backs in here if you're not giving them any kind of boost, because they're not, you're not requiring these players in there. So I'll give them just a tiny bit of a boost. I'd rather have at least one other Eagles player in there if I have Hurts at MVP, one other Eagles receiving option. So I'll set it at that for now. Looks like I did not do that for Boston Scott. All right, lowering that. And then I'll rename this Hurts MVP. I just clicked create new group. Now I'm going to add Cousins MVP. Kirk Cousins, a very different quarterback than Jalen Hurts, so it's going to look a little bit different. But it starts the same way. I'm adding Kirk Cousins in the MVP spot as my key player. And then I'm going to go through and add all of his Vikings receiving options to the main group. Just anybody with a projection at all for the Vikings at this point. Obviously not including kickers and defense, because I don't think Kirk Cousins will be throwing to them. All right, good enough. Now with Cousins, I'm not going to be clicking this box. I know that if Kirk Cousins is MVP, he's going to be bringing at least one receiver along for the ride with him. Kirk Cousins just doesn't do much on the ground. So yeah, if he's in the MVP spot, he's probably bringing one of these receiving options along with him. The real question is, do you want to move this up to 2? Do you want to see if any key players use? So that's Kirk Cousins. Do I want to require that 2 of the players from this group are in the lineup with him? And I think that is a good question. I think that's something you should be asking yourself as you are setting your lineups. I think that I will probably leave it at 1. Receiving options get a smaller boost here. So if Kirk Cousins is spreading it around, it's not like DraftKings where you get 1 point per reception. It's easier for Kirk Cousins to score, a little bit closer to what his receiving options are on each passing play. I think I'll just keep it at 1, but I'm also giving these players boosts, so that'll make it more likely that I'm going to have 2 in there with him. And once again, I'm giving bigger boosts to players with lower projections. I'm not even going to give a boost to the running backs, but theoretically, I could still get a lineup that has Cousins at MVP and has just one of these running backs in there with him. That's something that currently I'm allowing to happen. You have to think about how likely is that scenario and how often is that lineup, that type of lineup, going to be used in these contests. I think for now I'm going to leave it as allowing it, but not really giving them a boost because I don't think it's likely that Cousins, is the MVP by throwing it to Alexander Madison for a touchdown and then having a rushing touchdown. I think that's an unlikely scenario, but for now, I'm going to at least allow for that kind of a lineup. Hey guys, we've got a no-brainer offer for you today from BetMGM, and it ends tonight. So make sure you get on it today. Bet just $10, and if any team scores a touchdown tonight in either game, you'll win $200. It has to be a money line bet on either game. Bet $10, and if any team scores a touchdown tonight, which one of the teams tonight is going to score a touchdown, you'll win $200. We won't see many short things like this going forward, so I would recommend jumping on this offer now to win your free $200. Just click the link in the video description below to claim it. All right, then the next group you could think about is Cousins at flex. So I think that you could definitely have Kurtz be optimal in the flex spot without any Eagles pass catchers. I think that it is much less likely for Cousins to do so, just for the reasons I mentioned. That every time Cousins throws the ball, whoever is throwing it to is getting more fantasy points than he is. So I'm going to make a group for Cousins in the flex. I think I'm going to allow it. I think there is some possibility for Cousins to be optimal in the flex without bringing any pass catchers with him. You do need at least one player from each team. So Cousins doesn't even need to put up many fantasy points if the Vikings sputter and Cousins throws the ball around a little bit and none of his receiving options really put up many fantasy points, but Cousins gets enough yards through the air and maybe has a couple rushes, he could be optimal in the flex without bringing anybody along for the ride. All right, where is he? Kirk Cousins. There we go. So now I'm adding him. This is not Cousins in the MVP spot. It's just Cousins in the flex spot. Adding him as a key player. And then same as before, I'm going to go through and add all of his receiving options. The difference here is I'm also going to be adding them as captains. I don't know if probably not. I'm going to add not going to bother adding the running backs for this one. So now I already added Jefferson and Thielen as flex plays, and now I'm adding these receivers in the MVP spot. Because for this group, we don't have Cousins taking up that MVP spot, so we can include these players as well. All right, there we go. So I have attempted to add all of the Vikings receivers in the flex spot and those same players in the MVP spot. It's possible I missed someone. Just doing this quickly. Now I am going to allow, as I said, for Cousins to be in the flex spot without any of these players. So I'm clicking this only apply plus minus adjustments. So this does not apply. I'm only applying the plus minus adjustments. And I'll just give a little bit of a boost to each Vikings pass catcher in lineups that have Cousins. Maybe I need to add a little bit more than this. So for example, if I put this at 10%, Thielen projects for, let's round this up to 12 fantasy points, and then I add the 10% boost here. That means that you're adding 1.2 fantasy points to Thielen's projection in lineups that have Kirk Cousins in the flex spot. So then he would be projected instead of 12 points, he'd be projected for 13.2 fantasy points in those lineups that have Cousins in the flex spot. I don't know if I want to give quite that big of a boost. This, as you can probably tell, is not an exact science by any means. I run several crunches and I look at what my lineups look like, and then I come back and I adjust these numbers as I go. So you can give bigger boosts for lineups that have Cousins in the lineup. For now, I'm just giving little boost to Vikings receiving options for any lineup that has Kirk Cousins in the flex spot. I'm not going to do the same for Hurts because he could get there on the ground and he already projects better than Cousins. So I think that will do it for groups for me for now. And I'll save this. I'll come out here. I'm going to change this from whatever this is to use my projections crunch. I put 149 in here typically just because I'd make one dummy lineup and I use that lineup. So, but for the purpose of this, I'm going to crunch 150, see what comes out. And you can see right away this first lineup. I told you I want to allow for the possibility that Kirk Cousins is my only Viking in the flex spot. Comes out in the very first lineup, and you have to think to yourself, do I like that? Do I want that to be a possibility? Or do I want to require that when Kirk Cousins is in the flex spot, at least one other Viking comes in there? I'm okay with it, and I'm glad to see that I'm not getting a ton of lineups look like that. I don't want it to be a huge portion of my portfolio are lineups with just Kirk Cousins from the Vikings in the flex spot. I prefer having Adam Thielen, one of the receiving options in there, just because they do score more on each passing play. But if I have a few mixed in here, here's another one. I'm totally fine with that. So I'm okay with how these are looking. One thing that I did not do is put a cap on my MVP spot. So you can see I got 65% Jalen Hurts in the MVP spot. It seems a little bit high. So I'm going to go to this MVP tab. Under exposure, I'm going to edit this and say 4 players in the MVP spot. I'm setting exposure cap at 20%. And I'll crunch again. See what comes out. All right, so I'm getting a good amount of Hurts and Cousins as expected. 2 of the higher projected plays today. Not getting a ton of any of these running backs. Am I comfortable with that? Do I want to play a little bit more? Hope things get weird in this game, as I am usually hoping for on these single game slates. I'll probably be giving boosts to several of these players. At the very least, I'll give a boost to CJ Ham. Make sure that he is in my player pool, because when he's under 3 fantasy points, he's not making it into my player pool currently. And I'll probably go through and give, little boost to these guys as well. Make sure that I'm at least close to the field and hope for things to get weird. These guys, Alexander Madison, probably not putting up a big score. 8,000 is a hefty price tag for him. So this 4% projected ownership makes a lot of sense. He probably doesn't do it unless something gets really weird in this game, either an injury or the game script is in his favor. I can't think of too many scenarios where Alexander Madison is going to pay off this 8,000 price tag. I guess there's a scenario always where Dalvin Cook rushes it down, or the Vikings bring it down to the 2-yard line. Dalvin Cook is tired. They bring in Alexander Madison. He vultures a touchdown. There are scenarios. So I would like to be above the field on these kinds of players when they're getting such low ownership, and then just hope for the best. And I'm not going to have a ton of any of them. I'm just sprinkling them in all of my lineups and hoping that something goes weird in this game, because when I win, I want to win big, and you don't win big by having the same players as everybody else. All right, now these players, same thing. Jalen Reagor, currently not in my player pool. I'll give a little boost to these guys. Typically, I'm going to want Quez Watkins to have a bigger projection than Pascal and Reagor, for example, because he had a bigger projection to begin with. So I think Quez Watkins is more likely to put up a big score than Pascal or Reagor, and also because he costs more. So currently, if I have them all with the same projections and he's 7,000, they're both 6,000, Fantasy Cruncher is going to want to give me more of these guys who cost less. So I'm typically going to want to have a bigger projection for Watkins here. Getting no Justin Jefferson, that's probably an adjustment that I'll make. AJ Brown. But really, I'm just kind of giving you examples, showing you what I am thinking about as I'm doing this. Yeah, getting no defenses currently. 2.7% of the Eagles, 0% of the Vikings. Kind of makes sense. They're a little bit expensive relative to some of the other players on the slate. And also, it's not a great spot for either defense. But at the same time, I'm probably going to be taking some shots on these defenses today. So I'll give them little projections boosts. And then I'll crunch again and see what comes out. All right, so I got a little bit more with these projections boosts, but again, I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna go through every all of my crunches right now. Sometimes I end up crunching 30 times. More often, it's more like, 6 or 7 times. But I'm just going to keep crunching until I get to exposure levels that I like on each player. And I just go through, after each crunch, I go through tab by tab. I look, am I happy with the amount that I have of Hurts and Cousins? Yes, I am. 52%. That seems great. What about at running back? Am I happy with these exposures? No, these seem really low. I'm going to want more of some of these off the beaten path running back options. So I will continue to give these guys boosts, and I'm going to do it incrementally. I'm happy with that amount of CJ Ham. Of course, as I give these guys boosts, I'm going to get less of CJ Ham. So you have to, constantly be tinkering. But this is my process I go through, and I'm looking at each different tab here, looking at the exposure levels I'm getting. Am I happy with them? Now, I am, as I'm showing you, I'm changing my actual projection on these players. Typically, if you don't have a lot of experience with this, I recommend using the thumbs up option, provided that you've already given at least enough of a boost that you are at least getting the player in your player pool. See if giving thumbs up might be enough for you. That's probably a safer option if you are newer to Fantasy Cruncher. All right, I think that will do it though. Just showing you in general my Fantasy Cruncher process for setting up these single game slates. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching and good luck tonight.